I've always called major gaming YouTubers frauds, and shades of that always trickle through in really weird and unusual ways. You know, like from Angry Joe not knowing the names of basic Mario enemies to like trying to downplay every major Nintendo release. Like gaming YouTubers are completely out of touch with what people are actually playing, what they're talking about, what they enjoy, and what people expect to see. They entirely want to focus on like hardware and sales and not talk about like the actual games, what people actually like, because they themselves don't enjoy video games. And I do think a recent example of that is ReviewTechUSA's attempt at talking about The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, because this is rich, okay? You know, the Pretendos are in a big situation right now when it comes to the Zelda brand, because, you know, for the past 30 years, like, basically what they did was they tried to downplay every major every major Zelda game as being just a rehash of A Link to the Past. They've been doing this since Ocarina of Time. Like, oh, it's just a remake. Oh, it's just a sequel to the remake. Oh, it's just a kiddie game. Oh, it's just a rehash of Ocarina. Oh, it has motion controlled gimmicks. They always come up with something, right? And it's obvious to any real fan eventually that these people don't play the games. They have no intention to, but like they love downplaying Zelda in order to make their favorite things look better in comparison, right? You know, so many people like tried to say Darkstalkers was a big thing, that Okami was a big thing, that Dark Souls was a big thing, but in the end they all like just lost out to Breath of the Wild, right? You know, Breath of the Wild stomped them all. And it revitalized the entire, like, you know, basically reestablished Zelda as like the king of like fantasy action adventure games, right? You know, after years of like pretending that like Nintendo was behind the curve, of course they released this, and suddenly there's like no real debate about it anymore. So like what people like Rich have to do, what they've been trying to do is trying to weasel out of this, right? They've been trying to tell people that like, but there are people who liked those older Zelda games. There are people who liked the Ocarina formula, and now we're never, ever going to get those kind of games again. Which, of course, is ridiculous because this is Nintendo we're talking about. We're getting a major new 2D Mario game this year. You know, like, the idea that we're never going to get a throwback, like, top-down or traditional 3D Zelda is, like, laughable, right? It is completely absurd. But, like, people like Rich are trying to normalize the argument because they are trying to find something to complain about when it comes to Nintendo. And the thing is, though, and Rich straight up admits this, he does not play Nintendo. He does not play Zelda, right? Rich from ReviewTechUSA admitted in his video covering this topic that he hasn't played a single Zelda game since A Link to the Past. A Link to the Past is the only Zelda game he's ever beaten, according to him. I want you to think about that for a minute. A Link to the Past, a game released 30 years ago, 1991, right? You know, one of the best, like, Super Nintendo games ever. Like, you know, the top-tier Nintendo game, you know, an all-time classic. You know, generations of fans grew up on that game. It's one of the best games ever made. Like, I don't blame Rich for buying and playing that game. You know, I don't mind people saying it's the best thing ever or that it's their favorite Zelda game or whatever, but, like, think about this. You know, like, A Link to the Past is so good in these people's eyes that it invalidates everything else that came after it, right? You know, Ocarina of Time was downplayed. You can see, like, Ego Raptor trying to, like, do this, like, in a sequelitis video. You know, Majora's Mask was downplayed, Wind Waker was downplayed, Twilight Princess was downplayed, Skyward Sword was downplayed, and it got so prevalent, it got so bad that Nintendo had to invent the open world formula, and, like, all of these people just got completely destroyed. They got completely wrecked. What happens, right? ReviewTechUSA makes a video complaining about not getting traditional Zelda games, even though he admits in his video that he doesn't play Zelda at all. It's not even a matter of like traditional versus modern versus classic. Like, it is versus top down. Like, it is about like a group of people who don't play video games who are trying to manipulate your opinions of them for their own gain, right? You know, Angry Joe does this. Rich does this. Everybody does this, right? Everybody in the community does this. And it just really needs to be called out more. Like, it is disgusting to me that more people don't address this. Like, how do you go 30 years without finishing a single Zelda game? You know, some of the most critically acclaimed games ever. Like, to me, the entire concept of that is simply absurd.